What is up, you guys? Ryan Brewer back here, the host of Michael Myers Reacts, and today I'm here for Ranking Podcast 2. This time, you can tell from the title, I am going to be ranking the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Before I get into this, if you have not seen my first ranking podcast about the Halloween franchise, go check that out. It's the podcast before this one. Also, in the comment section down below, I can't talk. In the comment section down below, let me know if you guys are enjoying this ranking podcast series so far. This is Ranking Podcast 2, ranking the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Now, I'm going to be ranking the entire Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, but my list will not include the Nightmare on Elm Street remake from 2010. I am sticking to the original films, not the 2010 remake, and I'm not including Freddy vs. Jason. I know some people consider Freddy vs. Jason a Nightmare on Elm Street film, which I guess it is in a way, but like I said, I'm doing the original Nightmare series, not adding Freddy vs. Jason or the 2010 remake. And again, I'm doing what I did with the first ranking podcast. I am going to go from best to worst. I know people usually go from worst to best, but I'm doing this oppositely. I am going to go from best to worst. I have 7 movies here that I'm ranking because the original Nightmare franchise is 7 movies. So I'm going from A Nightmare on Elm Street all the way to Freddy's Dead and everything in between. So my list, there are 7 movies on my list for today's ranking. So let's just go ahead and get right into the ranking. Number 1 on my list is pretty obvious, just like it was for my Halloween franchise ranking list. Halloween 1 was my favorite in the franchise. My favorite for the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, number 1 on my list, is A Nightmare on Elm Street 1984, the original. Like I said about Halloween, there's not much to say about Halloween 1978, and that's the same with Nightmare on Elm Street 1984. There's not much to say about it. At the time that it came out, it was new, it was creative. You know, there wasn't really any movies about a guy with so-called knives for fingers killing people in their dreams. Now, if you didn't know, A Nightmare on Elm Street 1984 was directed by Wes Craven. It's a Wes Craven film, and it was also the first movie, I believe, for Johnny Depp, which he played Glenn. The actors and actresses in the original Nightmare on Elm Street did great. Heather, who played Nancy, I forgot, Langkamp or something like that. I forgot her last name. I'm kind of going blank, but Nancy did great in it. Glenn did great in it. Everyone did great in it. And, of course, Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. You can't go wrong with that. Robert Englund is always going to be the original gangster, if you will, the best Freddy Krueger ever. No matter how many years go by that we don't have a new film, even after Robert Englund's passing, he is still going to be known as Freddy Krueger. He resembles Freddy Krueger. He is Freddy Krueger. And that's with a lot of fans. Like, Robert Englund will always be our Freddy Krueger. But just because he's our Freddy Krueger and he's our favorite Freddy Krueger, our favorite person who is played Freddy Krueger, doesn't mean that someone else can't play Freddy Krueger. For the longest time, I thought that. I really did. I was like, there's nobody that's ever going to be able to take on the role like Robert Englund did, which I still agree with that. I don't think anyone's going to ever play it as good as Robert Englund, but I believe there's someone out there who can play Freddy, and we could be satisfied with the person's... I don't know how to explain it. Like, the person's adaptation of Freddy, like... I think someone else out there can play Freddy very well, but they will never take Robert Englund's spot. Another reason why A Nightmare on Elm Street 1 takes my number 1 spot is because the movie was actually scary. If you have seen the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, you know that after a while the films become comical and not as scary as it was when it first started. Nightmare on Elm Street 1 to this day, it's not scary to me, obviously, because now, the 84 was a long time ago, but of course it's a classic and it never gets old. Just because it doesn't scare people anymore doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad movie. It's kind of the same thing with Halloween 1978. Just because the movie isn't really scary anymore, it's still eerie, don't get me wrong. Halloween 1978 is still eerie, but it's not scary anymore. It's kind of the same with Nightmare on Elm Street. It's more eerie than scary now. Some people still may be scared of the film. I could see, if it's your first time watching A Nightmare on Elm Street, like the younger generation, it may, freak them out a little bit, but obviously Nightmare on Elm Street 1984 will take my number 1 list. So let's go ahead and get right into number 2 on my list, and it has to go to A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors from 1987. Now, I know that A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 was when Freddy started to become more comical. He wasn't taken as seriously, but I love the story of A Nightmare on Elm Street 3. Like, you know, they're all like, supposedly they think that they're all suicidal kids. They think they're crazy, when really it's just Freddy messing with them. And the movie, I just love the movie. I enjoy it every time I watched it, and I've seen A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 a good amount of times, and I just really like the film. I enjoy everything about it. And of course, Robert Englund, his performance as Freddy was obviously amazing. It's amazing in every Nightmare on Elm Street film that he's been in. But A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 has always stuck with me. I've always enjoyed it. I could sit down and watch that movie. I know a lot of the Nightmare on Elm Street fans are their favorite is A Nightmare on Elm Street 3. Some people think Dream Warriors is the best Nightmare on Elm Street in the entire franchise. So yeah, number 2 on my list has to go to A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors from 1987. So let's go ahead and get to number 3 on my list, and that has to go to New Nightmare from 1994. I have many reasons why New Nightmare is probably my 3rd favorite. For one, Freddy Krueger is scary again. So this was after pretty much all the films. This was kind of the last movie in the Nightmare on Elm Street, series. Not counting Freddy vs. Jason, of course. I know that he did Freddy vs. Jason, Robert Englund. But New Nightmare, it's number 3 on my list because Freddy was actually scary again on New Nightmare. And not just that, I mean, Wes Craven came back, Heather came back. I know the story, though, to New Nightmare is a little weird. I've seen that movie. I've seen all these movies a good amount of times, but New Nightmare has a weird storyline. But the thing, it's just so good. It's enjoyable. Like, there's not one thing in New Nightmare that I don't enjoy. Like, the way they made Freddy look in it was just, he was scary. It was like, when New Nightmare came out in 1994, obviously that was a whole new look for Freddy Krueger. And it was a very cool look. He looks frightening in that movie. And instead of having like a glove, that was like his actual hand. And instead of having 4 knives, he had 5. It was just a really good movie. I actually watched that movie just the other day when I made the time that I've made this podcast. I watched that movie the other day, and I still really enjoy New Nightmare. There was actually a part in New Nightmare I forgot. I didn't watch New Nightmare for a good while, and that scene where like Nancy's like by the closet and Krueger comes out of the closet like that, I didn't get scared, but it did catch me off guard a little bit because I completely forgot what happened. Like, it's been a good while since I watched that movie. So New Nightmare still has its moments. I mean, it didn't scare me like I said, but it caught me off guard. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot Freddy did that. It was one of those kind of moments. But New Nightmare takes number 3 on my list. So number 4 on my list has to go to A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, 1985. The reason why that is number 4, well, I like New Nightmare more than A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and I like A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 better than A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I know a lot of people do not like A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, but I don't mind it. It's number 4 on my list because, once again, Freddy Krueger was scary in it. He wasn't the comical Freddy Krueger. He was taken more seriously, and I know a lot of people just don't like that movie. To me, though, it is kind of an awkward sequel because, I mean, you watch A Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and then you go to Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and it's kind of like, eh. Like, a lot of people say that you could skip A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and go straight to A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors because A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors is like a direct sequel to the original Nightmare on Elm Street. But I still watch A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 because he's actually scary in it, as I said. Dave McRae, some of you might watch Dave McRae, but Dave McRae is talking about that scene, at the pool party where Freddy's looking over and you could see the fire and just his eyes are like really big and his face is scary. I agree with him. I watched that movie not too long ago. It isn't, like I said, it's my apparently my fourth favorite, according to this list. But my list could change after a while, I don't know. But I agree with what Dave McCrae said, talking about how he looked just so scary at that shot. And I agree with him. I watched that the other day, and it's just like eerie. You look at him, you're like, yeah, he is not messing around. Freddy Krueger is not there messing around. He's there meaning business. So yeah, number 4 on my list goes to A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, 1985. So number 5 on my list, we're getting more into the garbage Nightmare on Elm Streets. These last 3, before I even get into them, these last 3 on my list, the only reason I watched them is because of Robert Englund and his performance as Freddy Krueger. I will watch him play Freddy at any circumstance. Like, I watched him on recently. I know it's been on the air for a while since this podcast came out, but I seen it on the day that it came out. I watched him come back and play Freddy on the Goldbergs. He was on an episode of the Goldbergs, just last month in October. And he wasn't on it very long. He was mostly on the end of it, but seeing him play Freddy Krueger again was really amazing. It was nice to see him play Krueger again, and it's really enjoyable. I mean, if you're a fan of A Nightmare on Elm Street and Robert Englund's like, oh, I'm going to play Freddy again, for even just that little scene at the end of Goldbergs was just very exciting for us fans. So yeah, now we're getting into the not so good Nightmare on Elm Street films. Number 5 on my list has to go to A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Masters from 1988. That movie is where Freddy really becomes comical. He is at the point where you cannot take Freddy seriously. The most memorable scene from A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, is when he's talking to, I think it was Alice or something, and I think it was Alice. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section down below, but he was talking to her, and he said they had this pizza, and he's like, I love soul food, or something like that. I can't remember. I watched it the other day, but I'm going blank again. But and then you could see the past people he's killed. You could see their faces on this pizza, and they look like meatballs. And he stabs one with one of his knives, and he eats it, and it's just so disgusting. Like, every time I see that scene, it's like not making me want to vomit or anything, but every time I see that scene, it's like, dude, that is just sick. It's like Freddy Krueger is one sick individual. Like, but the way Robert Englund plays him in A Nightmare on Elm Street 4 is good. Like, there's not... I haven't watched one Nightmare on Elm Street film or him playing Freddy and was like, oh, he didn't do good. Like, Robert Englund is Freddy Krueger. Like I said earlier in the podcast, someone else could come along and play Freddy and maybe do just as good, or I don't know, they could be maybe the second best Freddy, but no one will ever be Robert Englund Freddy. He is the original Freddy Krueger. He did, I made that video about him teasing that he might come back for one more Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I really, really hope so. I would love to see that, but I would also like to give other people a chance at the role and see how they do as Freddy. Because like Dave McCrae said, I've been watching a lot of Dave McCrae. That's why I keep bringing up Dave McCrae. But like Dave McCrae said, there's someone else out there who could play Freddy Krueger. That could take on the role and probably do a decent job at it, but no one will ever beat Robert Englund, and that's just how that is. But yeah, number 5 on my list goes to A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Masters from 1988. That movie is pretty much where Freddy is just taken as a joke at that point. That's where it really started getting bad. I know he joked a little bit in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors from 1987. I know he started getting comical there, but I think it was even worse in A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, which it was. I know it was. Number 6 on my list, which isn't really a surprise. These last 2 should not be a surprise to you guys, but number 6 on my list has to go to A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child from 1989. Now, A Nightmare on Elm Street 5 doesn't stick with me. I've watched A Nightmare on Elm Street 5 a good amount of times to where I should know how the film goes. Like, the film, like, I know that isn't it Alice? I'm pretty sure it's I may be getting my name screwed up because I'm not thinking clearly, but she has this child named, I think it was Jacob. Yeah, Jacob. And like, Freddy is like messing with her kid and all that stuff. It's just not really a memorable movie. Like, I've watched that movie a good amount of times, and I just I just can't remember it sometimes. It's like someone will ask me, "Hey, what's a Nightmare on Elm Street 5 about?" And I'll be like, I can't tell you because I can't think of it. And that's the one. Well, these last two I really don't watch. They're the least watched by me personally. Nightmare on Elm Street 5, I just don't watch it a lot. I know it's about some kid named Jacob, and Freddy's missing with him and all that stuff. That's really all I can think of for a Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. And I just watched it the other day, and I still can't think. It like just does not stick with me. I feel like I would have to watch that movie 3 times in one day just to make a review on or tell somebody what it's about. So yeah, number 6 on my list goes to A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child from 1989. So we are getting into the last one on the list, and this last one should not be a surprise to anybody. Everyone listening to this podcast, if you are a Nightmare on Elm Street fan or a Freddy Krueger fan, you know what the worst film in the franchise is. Number 7 on my list goes to Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare from 1991. Oh, that movie was just terrible. I mean, you got him doing, the stupid power glove thing and the nice graphics. Like, all that stuff is just really ridiculous. Freddy at this point was 100% a joke. Like, there wasn't not even a little slight, there's not even a little part of Freddy in that movie that is actually scary. If you're watching Freddy's Dead, you're literally watching that movie to pass the time or just to watch it to see how bad it is. Because Freddy's Dead, the only redeeming thing about Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, is Robert Englund as Freddy. His performance was great again, but the script and just everything about Freddy's Dead was pure trash. And if you're a Nightmare on Elm Street fan and you've seen the entire franchise, you know that Freddy's Dead is just pure trash. It is no good. If you're not a Freddy fan and you're trying to become a Freddy fan, a Nightmare on Elm Street fan, I could save you the trouble. Don't watch Freddy's Dead. But if you want to watch the entire franchise, if you're like, I really want to become a hardcore fan, yes, watch Freddy's Dead. I mean, there may be people out there who actually like Freddy's Dead. If there is people out there, then good for them. I personally do not like Freddy's Dead. It's the worst in the franchise. That's why it is number 7 on my list. But yeah, that's my list for the Nightmare on Elm Street films. My ranking. If you guys, like I said earlier, if you guys are enjoying this ranking podcast series, let me know in the comment section down below. Leave a like, subscribe if you ain't already subscribed. Let me know in the comment section down below what your favorite Nightmare on Elm Street film is. And if I didn't say that for the first ranking podcast for Halloween, go back to that one and let me know what your favorite Halloween film is, which I'm pretty sure I probably know. I mean, it's almost everybody's favorite. But let me know what your guys' favorite Nightmare on Elm Street film is. I would love to hear from you guys. Like I said, please like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, and let me know what you guys are thinking of these ranking podcasts. And I will see you guys on the next ranking podcast. Peace.